When you dance the dance of another, you make yourself in the image of its creator. You empty yourself so that her work can live within you. Do you understand?
Who is it? Who's there? I've been expecting you. The American girl. I knew you'd come. You want to kill me? You want to kill Elena Marcus?
You're in a company now. You have to find your right place. You have to decide. What is it you want to be for this company? Is it the head? The spine? The sex? The heart?
You wanted to kill me. What are you going to do now, huh? Now,
I want to be this company's hands.
Death is coming for you.
Higher.
You wanted to kill Elena Marcus. Hell is behind that door.
Higher.
You're going to meet death now. The living dead.
Sometimes I only need to be told twice.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.
There's nothing to fear except God. Whatever that means to you.
Do I look like someone who cares what God thinks? I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Why do I say this? Because we got Holy Ghost power.
You're listening to a podcast exploring faith and fear, what scares us and what saves us. This is The Fear of God. Hello and welcome to a unique episode of The Fear of God. This is something that we have never had to do before, something that hopefully will not be a continual recurrence, but something that we think you're going to enjoy. Because of the unique nature of the episode, I am going to forego the usual the usual introductory platitudes, except to say, please go to iTunes, please leave us a rating, please leave us a review. We would love that. If you love the show, please show us that love. Normally I would go through the whole oh, Nathan's off somewhere dancing a ballet in skimpy clothing, but no, he's right here. He's with me. He's right here. He's with me. Nathan, hi, buddy.
Hey, man.
So listeners have known, they've heard a couple of times now that some unfortunate things happened to our Suspiria episode during #ILoveThe70s. We recorded that conversation. It's happened only 2 or 3 times in the run of our show where just something will happen to the recording that we won't know about until it's too late to do anything about it. What we thought, we didn't want to simply... because I had a great conversation with Bill Oberst Jr. You should go check that out. Thank you again, Bill, for being part of that. But we didn't want to simply just bypass and not address, one of the absolutely essential elements of 70s filmmaking, that of the giallo subset of, the slasher, thriller, horror films. So we wanted to approach it again, but rather than just, we'll just tag on this bonus episode later, we thought, well, let's do something kind of fun and different about it. In our original recording of the 1977 Suspiria, our conversation about that, we both said, hey, it'd be interesting to see the 2018 remake just to see, how it compares, what differences are there, what's kind of in play. So we figured we wanted to try to do some justice to Dario Argento's 1977 film, also do something a little different than just rehashing the same conversation. So what we're about to do for you right now, in a briefer way than we normally do, we're not going to do our normal segments, we're just going to dive into the conversation, is we're going to converse about Dario Argento's 1977 original film, Suspiria, and we are also going to be conversing about what we have now both seen, the 2018, directed by, forgive me if I get his name wrong, Luca Guadagnino.
Oh my gosh.
I know it's terrible. Do you know Guadagnino? No, I don't know.
Try it again. Let's just see.
This is going to be the next hour. It's just me like, Luca Guadagnino.
Like, Dario Argento is so easy. Why does this guy got to have this name?
No, I feel so awful. Look, I'm from the South, y'all. We don't talk right. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, I sincerely do not mean to be disrespectful. It's hard for me to get names sometimes. But the 2018
few of us do mean to be disrespectful.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Kind of are.
So what we're going to do for this, we had kind of done this in a more playful way during our conversation, our quarterly king on Pet Sematary, where because we were dealing with a remake and we were dealing with having seen the 1980s film of Pet Sematary, we kind of pitted key elements of the film against one another. And so, Nathan, if you will permit me, for the structure of this conversation, we are going to just sort of dive into, we'll pick, I've got about 6 or 7 little elements of the film here that we'll just make our way through, talk about things we liked, and converse about the 77 film, converse about the 2018 film, just in different ways. So you ready? You're going to dive right in?
I'm ready to dance, Reed.
Okay. Oh, the dance. Okay, so first up top, I am going to categorize this as the general production aesthetic. So these films, despite being, similar plot-wise, have very different looks and feels to them. So first off, I'll start and then let you talk because I've already been talking a while. The 1977 film, as is typical of giallo films, is very colorful, vibrant colors, lots of striking reds and greens and blues. And what fascinated me most about the remake is that it is almost like a color. Like it is just kind of this like sort of orange burgundy-ish sort of thing when it's not wintry and straight up grayed out. It is I was surprised at the general mutedness of the color palette of the film. But not even just talking about the colors and things, which talk a little bit about your experiences of recognizing the general production design, the general production aesthetic, and pitting the two films against one another.
Well, I am going to tell a funny little story in the spirit of that. So I had some traveling I did recently and had downloaded, in order to view on that on those travels, Goodnight Mommy, The Vanishing, and this newest Suspiria. And Suspiria was last, and I had started it in the hotel, free from prying eyes, because I don't know what's in this film.
Right.
Well, I couldn't finish it because it's 2.5 hours in the hotel. And so didn't want to do this, but had to finish it on a plane. And fortunately for me, I had chosen a wall seat, a window seat, because I effectively, put the little tray out and had the iPad on the tray, literally facing the window. Like,
oh, wow.
Literally facing the window for the entire last hour, because that is some insane stuff. And I was like, man, I don't even want to have to give some sort of disclaimer to my neighbor here, and all neighbors around me. To your point about production stuff, I did see, kind of in the spirit of that, was in Amazon, at least in that format, when you pause it, it'll pop up little trivial bits and whatnot.
Yes.
And one of them had to do with the production aesthetic and
how
intentional this director, please reference Reed's, naming him earlier.
You're smart not to try.
Yeah, Yes, I am. How intentional it was to not lean into the palette of the giallo version. Mainly just because I think, at least my understanding of it was, there was a sort of active way of not wanting to attempt recreating what happened there. And sort of more just, okay, let's take, and this is tilting my hand a little bit. This is something I really actually loved about the new film, is it kind of views the original as a Cliff's Notes without taking away from it, and just sort of blows it up and kind of, okay, let's take the story that was there and really kind of explore it. And I really appreciated that. So you are correct in noting the absence of bold coloring, and that was quite intentional. And in fact, if I'm remembering correctly, and it's possible I'm not, but if I'm remembering correctly, I think there was an intentional effort to dull the palette, to stand in contrast and to not attempt to be recreating that wheel. So
that's interesting. So, okay, so we might be on divergent paths here for this because, again, it's not a competition. They're two distinct films, admittedly, telling the same story with different visionary voices. But for me, I prefer the 1977 rich color palette. It's one of the things that draws me when I revisit the film or when I think about the film. I would, as we did with our Pet Cemetery conversation, we're going to kind of pick a winner. Obviously, it doesn't mean we actively, dislike one in favor of another. But so if I were to pick a winner between the color palette and production aesthetic of the 77 version versus the 2018, I would pick the 77 version. I love those striking, vibrant colors. Or am I to imply from your, viewing of this that you would maybe pivot towards the 2018 version?
You can imply that all you want, but you're not going to infer that from what I said, because that's not exactly what I was saying. I was just more validating your note that they are distinctly different. While I do think, that's probably getting way ahead. No, I actually think I can appreciate, and if we're going purely on intentional or rather memorable production design, I would side with you on the 77 version. I mean, it's hard to kind of, there's a lot of things you might say, well, the 77 is a little weird and it doesn't really expound much and it's hard to kind of pick up what's going on. But there's one thing that's pretty unimpeachable. The desire to make a joke right there is strong. But one thing that isn't is just the intentionality, the strength, the memorable nature of the production design of the 77. So I would join you there.
Okay, all right. So we're giving production design in general to 77. So moving to the next category I want to talk about is the script. So one of the things that we noted in our trivial exploration about the script for Dario Argento's version is that originally he wanted the cast of characters to be children, like in the 12, 13 range, and perhaps even a bit younger. The appropriate sort of studio heads were like, you cannot set a film this graphic and this bloody where like this is all happening to children. Like it'll be banned all over the world. You can't do that. So what he did was he basically raised the age of the core characters, but did not rewrite the script. So the characters speak in this kind of simplistic, almost naive language about things. So whereas, of course, the 2018 version, the script is much more deliberate. As you mentioned, it's an hour longer. And so it's got a lot more depth. It's got a tremendous amount more just world building and focal points with the characters. And so what's funny is while I admire and even enjoy the brevity of the 77 script, I think just as a visionary sort of storytelling structural piece, I think I prefer this remake in terms of just what it has baked in and layered in to the actual story itself. What did you track with any of those specific comparisons at all while you were watching?
There's a lot of ways in which, to me, the 77 one feels like a novelty, and that is its point. That, don't at me, film buffs, because that's just pure observations on one viewing of each of these. It, like I said, it's memorable in its production design, but I think, yeah, absolutely, the script for the new one is far more interesting. For a 2.5 hour movie, I was never not kind of in it and engaged.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, it is, yeah. So for despite a 2.5 hour runtime, there's very little to no fat, it feels like, on this, which is weird for it, kind of being a repackaging of an hour and a half, 40-year-old film.
Right.
But again, one little production note is I do think they were viewing the original as, like, their intention was not to remake the original. It was just to kind of,
right.
Like if you look in the credits, I believe Argento is credited as story by, or based on a screenplay by. That's it.
Right. Based on a
screenplay, which I haven't paid attention to a ton of remake notes and credits, but that feels like a different way you would adapt a thing than, based on Suspiria in 1977. Like,
right. Of course.
So yeah, I would again agree with you that script wise, this new one is the winner. If we're it fleshes naming winners.
Exactly. Yeah, it fleshes it out much more. Something that I'm not gonna. It kind of bleeds from production design and script. It's not a category where I would pit them against each other, because when I unpack it for you, you'll see it's not really fair to do so. The 77 film is set in a ballet academy, but the setting is really almost where the dancing component ends. It's just set in a ballet academy, whereas the particulars of the dance are somewhat vital to the narrative beats of this story, and that is one aspect that I found very, very compelling. Terribly compelling.
The choreography is amazing in this. In fact, to your point, I thought about noting this in the script section, but I just wasn't sure. Okay, is this? I mean, I suppose it ultimately is, but and also not knowing what else you're going to bring in here. But when it's presented in the new one, Mother Blanc, or do they call
Madame
her Mother?
Blanc.
Madam, yeah, they don't call them mothers
Madame
at that point. Madame Blanc in the new one, in pitching Susie on dance at all, describes it as letters, words in the air, a poem, a prayer, and Susie's reply is a spell. And I was like, that is a very, very cool idea. And I just loved that. I was like, I've never seen that. I've never heard of that used in a story like this. Like, to have your body itself be the thing through choreographed movement, casting a spell, is pretty awesome.
Yeah, and they use it in such effective ways. So this is not a subcategory. Well, actually, why don't we pivot into this?
Sure.
I was going to bring this up a little bit later. So one of the things I was going to pit these two films against each other is their general fear factor, their general sort of scary sort of elements, and that's tough to do. Because, as you mentioned, like, obviously they're after different things, the constraints of time and all of that different thing. But one of the things that I love about this 2018 version is the way in which it integrates and it's on the nose from the beginning that these are witches. Like, it just does not hide for almost any instance that these are witches and they're in a coven and something's funky. Whereas in the 77 film, it's like a very big mystery. It's like a last 10-minute reveal that this is what's going on. It's sort of teased along the way. Maybe in the last 30 minutes, they start sort of exploring the notion. But yeah, it's absolutely obscured. Whereas this one, go ahead.
What's interesting about that note that's just now coming to me is, in the 77 version, you as a viewer are kind of taken through this horrific, almost funhouse type of, and I'm saying that in terms of the color palette and whatnot, of funhouse, weird, whatever, what is going on with these people. What's fascinating, this again just coming to me, about the new one is the old one, you're as a viewer unaware. The new one, like you just referenced, pretty much out of the gate, even if you haven't seen the original film, like, okay, they are playing a con on these young girls, which is fascinating from a viewer standpoint because it almost makes you complicit in the story being told. It's like we are keenly aware, actively, that these young girls are being played. And so what is that? And so that's almost a fascinating, that we don't totally have time for here, but that's almost a fascinating trail to walk of film and art, of like what that means and how, because what you were just tiptoeing up to that maybe you'd ultimately get to in terms of the tone and flavor. Listener, I don't know where Reed's going with these topics, so apologies to you, Reed, if you're like, Nathan, I was going to get there.
You're fine.
I don't know where you're going.
No, you're fine.
If someone were to be like, which of, not even comparing the two films, but the new Suspiria, I remember watching it and being like, this is a horror movie. Ignore even the payoff of the final 30 minutes, which is horrific in itself.
Oh my gosh.
But from a pure like dread, kind of malevolent intent that's readily visible, victims who are unaware they are victims, like even just from a filmcraft standpoint, like that is a horror movie. And again, I don't know that I'll revisit the new one, just not because I dislike it, but just because of time and life. But like, if someone were to say, what's a recent good horror movie, I might point to this as something that would make that list.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's very effective, and it gave me more to think about after it was over and done with. And I don't think that that's specific to the 77 film being so old, or me being so disconnected from its... I think in our previous sort of lost to time conversation, I think we had both sort of admitted that the 77 Argento film was more an exercise in style over substance. I mean, we really struggled to sort of glean something substantial thematically from the 77 film, not because there's nothing there, but it is so stylistically specific. And this film, boy, there were so many scenes that really captivated my imagination. They dug into the notion of delusion and how this is something that is present in the 77 film, because it was ultimately part of what pivoted our thematic conversation in that one is in the 77 film, the psychiatrist played by Udo Kier says to Susie, the main character, bad luck is not the product of broken mirrors, but of broken minds. Like, he really digs into, I'm a materialist and a scientist, and so those supernatural elements are really just not in my paradigm of belief. Whereas the 2018 film does dig into that with the Dr. Klemperer character, and they, it integrates that character in the finale of the film as crucial to sort of the interplay of what they're dealing with, and I found that immensely fascinating. Not to just like drop that and then move on. I want to talk for a moment about the different performances in the two films. The performances in the 77 film were good and strong, but there was a language barrier. The performances were they didn't record sound at the time that they recorded the 77 one, and they like dubbed all the sound later. Sometimes the performances felt a bit theatrical and broad, whereas these are much more subtle. Did you note? I'm sure you did, because you're Nathan.
Huh?
Nathan.
Yeah.
You're a good man. So
oh man,
you. Oh man. So I'm sure you noted this, that with the exception of the two police inspectors, one of whom is really like, how do you sign up for that? Because
so it's a pretty unglamorous position here, pretty unglamorous role here. You're the cop. Oh, cool, authority figure. Yeah, I bet you're gonna be butt naked while a woman plays with your wand, or whatever, your witch's wand with a giant hook. Like, goodness gracious, Expelliarmus indeed.
Oh god. Oh my gosh. Oh, so But with the exception of the two chief inspectors.
Oh, actually,
there
what I
are-
wrote. I'm sorry. Actually, what I wrote down is
No,
those witches playing with their nightsticks. That's what I.
Night.
Yeah. Either way. You know, wand,
This is
magic
hopping
wand, nightstick.
right along.
Yeah.
But with the exception of those two police inspectors, there are no male actors in the film. So did you catch that Dr. Klemperer is not a male? Like,
Come on, man.
Of course. It's like so.
Well, what's
Tilda
funny?
Swinton-
What's funny is I did not know she played multiple roles. The second I saw him, I was like, one, that's not a dude.
Yeah,
two,
of course.
I bet that's Tilda. But I didn't know.
Yeah.
Now, maybe
I had the
I'm sorry.
exact same experience.
Go ahead, because I may be stealing some thunder you're about to lay out. So.
No. If I'm on the right wavelength, I think you're about to say the same thing. I didn't know until after the fact that she also played the gruesome, grisly, nasty-looking Helena Marcos figure at the end. Did you know that? Is that where you were
I
going?
did not know that at all. It didn't surprise me at all. I'm pretty sure it was Beckley. Did Beckley alert us to that on Facebook? Or
I can't remember that.
he did. I posted about it on Instagram, and he referenced it, and so it doesn't surprise me at all knowing Tilda Swinton as a performer. But
sure,
this as a brief note, and shout out to Beckley here too. Like the reason, Stephen, I didn't reply to that is just in the moment time, but also because I got a little confused at the end and ultimately. For you, Reed, I would actually be open to a more robust, normal Fear of God episode on this new film. But
okay, sure.
I got a little confused because of the kind of demonic figure that emerges at the end. Because if you remember,
Mother Death.
Okay, sure. I didn't catch that it had a name in the film itself. But if you remember in the 77, Marcos is the ultimate sort of figure of this coven, right?
Yes.
So clearly the name Marcos shows up in multiple places in the new film. You have that voiceover scene of them voting on who's going to lead.
Right.
When you first meet who is actually Marcos or Tilda under grisly Ninja Turtle pizza face costuming.
It's totally Krang.
Krang.
It's
well,
so
no,
awful.
there's an actual Ninja Turtle villain named Pizza Face. That's what I was referring to. But yes, either way, Krang, Pizza Face, whatever. I thought that was Marcos. Well, then what you just called Mother Death emerges, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. Is that Marcos? So I did get a little confused there, and I was on a plane, and the snakes were there, and I was like, what is with all these snakes on this mother effing plane? And so I didn't have time to dive into who was who there at the end.
Sure,
but it does not surprise me whatsoever because weird though she is, Tilda Swinton is a hell of a performer and just brings it. She's amazing.
She's incredible. She's really incredible. To the point that it's funny because she plays Dr. Klemperer, but some of the people on set did not quite catch that it was not like they knew that there was some
I'm pretty
heavy
sure they
makeup,
didn't tell.
but-
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't tell that. So those on the set, this is what I read. Those on the set who knew it was an actor in other makeup still did not know it was Tilda.
Wow.
Still did not know that it was her. And in fact, in press releases, whenever they would ask her, like, "Are you playing Dr. Klemperer?" she would say, "Dr. Klemperer is played by Lutz Ebersdorf, and that's who is credited as playing Dr. Klemperer."
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah,
and then. It was finally revealed. I think I'm remembering correctly what I read. It was finally revealed when some studious reporter then said, "Are you playing Lutz Ebersdorf?"
Right.
Which is when she finally said, "Yes, I'm playing Lutz Ebersdorf." And there was a hint in the name.
At least what I'll let you get to that hint. But what what I remember from the brief anecdote there was simply the way I read it framed was she offered. No one ever asks. Everyone asks, "Are you playing Klemperer?" And she says no. She says, "No one ever asks if I'm playing Ebersdorf." And so that was kind of the reveal.
But what's funny is there is a hint in the name Ebersdorf, which is how they credited it. I don't remember exactly how the words break down, but the Ebers, I believe, is like similar to like swine or like pigs.
Yep.
And Dorf is like town, so Ebersdorf in its translation is swine town, which is very similar to Swinton.
Right.
And so I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, to get back to sort of the core performances, I mean, I feel like this is really the only thing that I've noted or seen Dakota Johnson in. I know she's been in several things. Oh, come on. No, I've never seen those films. So, but apparently you have.
I didn't say that. I just know she's in them.
Well, okay. So I have not seen the 50 Shades movies, but she's been in more stuff than that, I think. But I just have never seen anything that she's been in. So this was my first sort of exposure to her. I think she's incredible in this film.
Well, what's funny is I remember piecing together what the cover art is and about the halfway point, which is different than the 77 version because it does go a different route, I think, if I remember in 77 correctly. I was like, I think she becomes part of it. I didn't know how or what, but something about the cover art and the way the character was beginning to buy into what was going on, I was like, I bet that's what they're after here, as opposed to, I think in the original, which is she rejects it all the way through, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So a comment on that to affirm, but then also to praise Jessica Harper, who was the lead of the 77 film, and I think probably one of the strongest performances in the 77 film. So she, in that film, she actively resists it. She kills Helena Marcos and then escapes the coven while the ballet school like sort of collapses around her. That's the way the 77 film ends. In this one, I kind of love that Susie's character, played by Dakota Johnson in the remake, is totally long conning them. Like it is revealed in that final thing when Pizza Face is sitting there and is like, I'm gonna, that's Elena Marcos, and she's like, yeah, we're gonna empty you out. There'll be nothing of you left, and then I'll inhabit your body. And then Madame Blanc, who is also played by Tilda Swinton, is sitting there like, something's wrong about this. Don't you sense that something's wrong about this? Because Susie, the character, is like totally embracing, like, I'm ready, this is why I came, or whatever. And that, like, when she says that, that's when suddenly, like, that death figure, which I think you're right, I don't think it's credited as death in the credits, but I don't think they ever say it in the film. But so that's when that death figure like emerges, which, hello, that's like a Bagul looking kind of nasty, scary. Oh man, when that thing emerges on the scene, I'm like, oh, I was not prepared for this film to come here.
Good night, mommy. This got real.
Good night, mommy. So
because you can't use oh man with this one because it's like a feminist movie. It's witches, It's like,
that's right. Yeah.
Well, see, that's interesting. That's interesting, and clearly this is a different type of episode than we're normally, and we're clipping a little bit. And apologies if I'm cutting you off rudely.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I'm at least calling it out this time as opposed to how I normally do it and just do it. I didn't interpret, and I'm not telling you you're wrong, I just didn't pick up on, if it's the case, that Susie is intending what ends up happening as much as she... In other words, when Blanc references something being wrong, I didn't intuit that the thing she might be discerning is Susie is here and ready and she's going to be whatever is next, versus just she was being protective of Susie. That's how I read that scene.
Well, and I think you're right. No, I think you're right. That's the way. So here's what's brilliant about that moment to me. And this is, again, my interpretation. And again, we're talking about the 2018 film because the 77 is much more direct. Susie is beset upon. She confronts Helena Marcos in a terrifying scene where, nightmarish zombie Sarah comes and like tries to kill her and everything. Oh, it's awful. But in the 2018 version, I think from Madame Blanc's perspective, she is worried for Susie and is telling her like, hey, I can make this all go away. If you have any doubts, and I can make, I think she is attached to that. What neither she, and because of her sort of abandonment of that, Helena Marcos kills her right then. Just sort of like, almost decapitates her right there in that moment. So Madame Blanc is now out of the picture. And that is when it was revealed that, again, Helena Marcos is like, what? What are you talking about? Because Susie then reveals, like, nope, I've been, like, this is why I came. I I am Mother Suspiria, because she says, like, what mother
Right.
were you anointed as? And she says, Suspiriorum, and she says, I am she. So that's when Susie sort of reveals herself as like, no, I am the one. And it makes sense when you look back at things like she's so ready to dive in initially on the dancing.
She's like 50 Shades Freed, brother. Come on. Let's do this.
And so, like, she's so in control, and it's so funny because that's in striking contrast to the way Jessica Harper, who does have a cameo in this film, late in the film, as a tribute to the 77 version, but her, as Anka. But in the 77 version, she is very, again, beset upon. Like, she's constantly trying to figure out what's going on. She's trying to piece the things together. Whereas in this film, the 2018 one, Susie is always very assured. She is never, even when characters are bringing sort of mysterious things to her, she's never seems alarmed by anything. She doesn't even seem alarmed by those freaky dreams with all this weird
awful
imagery and stuff. Yeah, she doesn't even seem alarmed by that. And it makes perfect sense when you get to the end to be like, oh, because this is her dance this whole time.
Do you... that's a good one, Reed. You did well. One, the dream is the lone reference to the maggot scene from 77 because there's worms falling in people's hair in the dream.
Yes.
But
yes.
Are you saying that, are you positing that Susie of the new one enters the story with that as her intention? Or you're just saying one?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I'm saying that
I'm not
from the beginning.
To me, her entering it knowing and ready and moving forward completely that way feels like a little bit of a stretch. I'm not refuting it. I'm just saying I'd be open to rewatching it with that in mind, knowing, or rather, I'm much more convinced that at a certain point she does become involved and convinced and desiring this thing, because I'm with you. I remember moments where it's like, man, she is really not phased by the weird stuff going on around here that she's being told about. But the only reason I would say I don't know that she's convinced of that from go, that she enters the story aiming for that, is just there does seem to at least be some. So she enters the story like the character at the beginning of the 50 Shades trilogy, and then she clearly leaves the story much more, just kind of open to all the things, I guess. But because I think that initial dance sequence when, you're tilting me your direction because, does she know everything? That's hard to convince me of in the moment. But does she know enough that she's angled herself here intentionally, is supported by just how much she has studied Blanc's career and knows that dance, which I don't know all the subheadings you're going to, but Olga's death sequence or not death ultimately, but her scene at like the 40-minute mark is one of the most horrifying scenes in a film I've ever seen. That was, oh my gosh.
Yes.
Like that scene happens, you're like, oh, we're here.
It's like 40 minutes in, and it is so intense, and it is grisly, and it is not done with almost any CGI.
I saw that. That ain't right.
She's a contortionist, so she's genuinely moving her body.
That ain't right.
It's like, good lord. Oh man, it's nightmarish. Well, okay, so
what are the
I
bullet
really
points
only
you got?
So I've only got two more, so I want to make it just sort of hit and run. I wanted to comment on the score because the musical score is so much of a prominent factor in the 77 Suspiria, scored by the band Goblin with assistance from Dario Argento. A very unnerving, sort of techno-laden score. Unlike musical scores that seek to be somewhat subversive or supportive of the scene, the Suspiria score from 1977 just is like in your face. It's just like, I'm here, pay attention to me. And whereas the score for 2018 is the first score by Radiohead frontman Tom York, and was, noted and popularized as a result. It's like, ooh, Tom York's finally scoring a film, and so there was much ado made about that particular factoid. I think if I were to pull up, like, what am I going to listen to? I did find Tom York's score very effective and very captivating and hypnotic. It's much more, if I can use this word, lovely to me than the 77 film. But the 77 score is it's just as an album, as a piece, it's kind of it gets in your head, and it's pretty hard to forget, even if you don't remember the specific melody, like just the sensibility of that techno sort of score. But that was one note. I don't want to bypass your thoughts on that if you have anything to say, and then I've got one final one before we wind it down.
I would lean hard towards new Suspiria score, just due to the cacophonous nature of the original.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree. And so then the last note that I have is just somewhat wrapped up for time's sake in theme or what we feel the film is after, but specifically the endings. The last half hour, as we've alluded to multiple times at this point and gone into some degree of detail, essentially the last 30 minutes, with the exception of the last 10 minutes of that epilogue with Dr. Klemperer, but the finale, the climactic finale of 2018 Suspiria is this horrific, there's no other word for it, just this horrific, macabre, like death emerges and people are getting eviscerated and people are getting
exploded,
blown the hell up, and they're like, I mean, it's just like, and I'm just sitting here watching it, and what's also weird is the camera, which prior to that had been very precise, these very well-structured scenes. It's not that this is not well-structured, clearly it is, but the camera takes on this very weird sort of hazy, foggy, kind of distorted viewpoint, and it's shaky, and it's an unsettling climax. It's a very, very just jarring, that death figure that it looked so much like Bagul from Sinister that I was like, I couldn't get that out of my head. While they're walking around, literally you're seeing one by one all of the witches of this coven that voted for Helena Marcos as their leading figure, and death just like everyone that voted for Helena Marcos, just wiping them out, just like touching them and blowing them up. And so that compared, and then I'll shut up and pivot over to you, that compared to the much more direct climax of the 77 film, where it's basically, as we've said before, the Susie character runs away after discovering that they're witches, encounters Sarah's basically the word's escaping me, but it's been mutilated body, and confronts Helena Marcos, and then is confronted by a now resurrected, or at least reanimated, mutilated body of Sarah trying to kill her, and then it all goes haywire from there. But I found it very interesting, the pivot to like Susie being the mastermind in 2018 and Susie being the victim in 77. And so I just wondered which of those takes do you like better? How does that play into sort of your overall thoughts of what the two different films are after?
I think it's a pretty dramatic pivot to whether Susie of the current one enters the story angling on where she lands, or whether she grows to, pursue that just within the course of the narrative. Regardless, it's pretty bold to take Susie from victim to victor, as it were. And I think that's really fascinating. I mean, maybe a summary statement, but I think the 77 version is the film when someone's like, hey, what's a fun little campy, kitschy horror movie? Like, what'd y'all cover? Oh, the 77 Suspiria. Like, ooh, curl up with some popcorn and watch that one. Like it's not going to do much for you kind of substantially. It will be it'll be an interesting watch, and you might tell the water cooler the next day on Halloween, like, oh man, for Halloween I watched this weird Jello movie from 1977. And they're like, Jello movie, what are you talking about? And you're like, but whereas this new one is like, if someone were to be like, hey, what is a pretty scratch past that surface, from casual recommendation of horror to like, okay, what's your next level kind of thing? I would say, goodness gracious, watch this. It just sort of, it's much more naturalistic. So, that's one thing. It's just from that standpoint, it's a little more accessible. But because of that, they genuinely are after this exploration of, okay, let's go with this concept, which is, a coven of witches have been operating for who knows how long. under the pretext of this ballet studio. And on top of that, set against real history or actual historical framework. And that's a pretty interesting sort of way to do it. You asked about the climax, like, because of that,
Sure.
By the time you get there, you're kind of Olga's dance of death is so grotesque and arresting that by the time you get to the full climax, you're like, whatever,
You're like, I guess this is what we've been signed up for.
Yeah.
Just,
I am
it's a
she.
natural
I
extension.
am she. Just bring it on. That's gonna be my new entry. Whenever I just want to make a dramatic entrance,
Sure. I am she.
Dress in something sheer and just proclaim I am she when I enter a room. But the original film is much more intimate. It's much smaller budgetarily,
yes.
And does feel more like an exercise in style, which is fine. Fine, and kind of has a certain place clearly. But
Sure.
I feel like I'm making a summary statement that you didn't ask for, but that was kind of where my
No.
thoughts were going.
And we can do that, and then probably pivot to the sort of the dual fog meter for this, and then wind it down. So again, this is a bit of a different type of episode. It's a bonus. We wanted to just throw it in there. We're not going to explore, but maybe at some point we will perhaps revisit this film, particularly the 2018 film, in some context to explore it more thematically, because I feel like it is after some interesting things in terms of, so it plays with notions of delusion and what is actually happening. It throws in comments about religion and philosophy. It uses the Dr. Klemperer character as a kind of a not an audience surrogate, but as sort of a foil to as a figure who does not quite buy into everything that they're being told about this coven of witches, and then is fully confronted with that reality at the end in this climactic portion, which I did find interesting, that as an epilogue to the 2018 film, Susie's character comes and gives him closure about his lost wife, and again, I keep referring to a he. The character is male. It's played by Tilda Swinton, but gives him closure about that, and then gives him peace in forgetting all of them. Wipes his, basically like Men in Black style, just wipes his memory of anybody that had caused him pain or grief or anything like that. And I think there is some interesting nuggets there to explore that perhaps in a different context or a different conversation we can explore more thoroughly about the nature of delusion and the reality. And then I found it terribly interesting that she essentially, by erasing his memory, gave him this peaceful version of a delusion. She eradicated things from his mind that were causing him pain, when this whole time he had been sort of reluctant to embrace what he was being told about the reality of these coven of witches. And there's some interesting things there. I agree with you, to make sort of my summary statement. I agree with you that the 77 film, I think, is more stylish. And if you're interested in kind of seeing the definitive giallo film from the 70s, Suspiria is your go-to. It's affecting as a piece. It's definitely briefer by a literal hour, and it is. It's an exercise in style that I think horror fans would tremendously enjoy. I think the 2018 film, kind of understandably, is after more complex, more interesting things. And so I feel like, perhaps just because it was new and fresh to me, I feel like I would lean heavier into enjoying and thinking about and exploring more the 2018 Suspiria than I would the original 1977 film by Dario Argento. Not to take anything away from it, but as a final exit point, do you want to do a dual fog meter for both of these films?
Yeah, but real quick on that note,
sure.
These would have been inclusions in the scripting question you asked earlier, but if we never return to this, just some thematic things that aren't fully formed, but just lines I wrote down. I love when, I think it's Patricia asks Klemperer about magic, whether he believes in it, and he says, No, but I do believe people can organize themselves to perpetrate crime and call it magic. That I can believe. That was an interesting note. Tilda, or no, I'm sorry. I wrote Old Man Tilda, which is Klemperer to Sarah at lunch. When they have that breakdown, when he tries to confront Sarah and tell her what's going on, he says, love and manipulation share houses and are frequent bedfellows, which I found a very compelling idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last one, which is, there's a lot of places we could run with all of these, but really kind of heartbreaking is actual Tilda, so Blanc to Susie. She says, dance can never be beautiful or cheerful again. Today we need to break the nose of every beautiful thing. And that's, I know.
Oh my gosh.
That's rough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, yes, please sally forth to where you want.
So, this is not in the depths and rich of theme that you just extrapolated, but you mentioned the Sarah character. That poor girl,
Goodness
like,
gracious.
yeah, she just gets like casually disemboweled and doesn't react, and I don't know what to do with any of that.
And again, if we have time in the future to revisit this film, like if you read a little bit, like that climactic scene, even from a production standpoint, was pretty traumatizing for these performers, which is really sad and hard.
Yeah.
I think they referenced her particularly.
So with respect to both of these films, and again with perhaps sideways apologies to the listeners for our brevity and sort of pace of this, we wanted to share some thoughts while it was timely to our 70s conversation about Suspiria in the context of the original film and the 2018 film. We may revisit this at some point in the future, but wanted to just throw a little bonus in here to share some of our thoughts on both of these films. So let's briefly pivot to the fog meter for both of these, at least in the context of this right here. What I'm going to have you do, we measure these films by their fear and their God, which translates more to their scares and their substance. So Nathan, why don't you give me your fear measurement for both the 77 and the 2018 film.
So you're wanting two values, not one average value, right?
Yep, two values, two distinct values.
And how I would interpret fear of just whether they're scary and to what level they are. The original, I would give, maybe 3. That razor wire room is pretty rough.
Oh man, that stupid razor wire
room. They did leave that. They left that out of the new one. I was really waiting for it. I was like, "Come on, y'all, don't let me down," and they did. For the new one, I would consider a 10. I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna go for a 10. It's scary as crap. It is.
Okay,
it is,
sure.
It is
sure.
haunting. It is grotesque. It is not pure startle or jump scare at all. It is dreadful. And it has a hell of a climax.
Sure. So I'm kind of right there with you on the fear measurement for Suspiria. I do find moments like the deaths in the original Suspiria to be quite jarring. The climactic scene in the 1977 Suspiria, I still find very arresting. Again, reanimated, mutilated corpse of Sarah trying to attack Susie and everything. It's got some grotesque imagery. I'm going to pivot much higher and give it a 6 for the 77 Suspiria. And then perhaps a bit confrontational to you, although I'm not intending to be. I'm actually going to pivot down from your 10 to a 9 for the 2018 one. I do feel like
I love that.
You made a
comment. I love that you thought just 1 point deviation was going to be confrontational. You son of a... No, you can't do it.
You raise that up to a 10 right now. I am she. But I feel like you made a comment earlier in this conversation where you said like it's a proper horror film, and I'm like, yes, like it so is. Not that the 77 one isn't, but the 2018 Suspiria is definitely a proper horror film. So 9 for me for that. For the substance measurement, on the 77 one, listeners don't know this, just in brief, like I mentioned it earlier, we really kind of struggled to grasp some of what the 77 Dario Argento film thematically was basically an example of us sort of gleaming a couple of lines that we then extrapolated something of what we bring to it, which happens from time to time. But we feel like it's an exercise of style over substance. I definitively do not feel that way. about the 2018 film. I feel like the 2018 film has a lot of very, very interesting things going on in it. So my God measurement or my substance measurement for the 77 film is actually going to be a 1.5, and my I know, and all right, and my substance my God meter for the 2018 film is going to be a solid 7.
Well, perhaps, I don't know, a little confrontational here. For the God meter of the 77 one, I might go with a 1. And to be fair, there is likely some proximity bias here that's skewing some of my 77 numbers a little bit. But regardless, I do think summarily that it's, as we've repeatedly said, style over substance for that one. So I don't feel like a 1 is off base. I would almost be open to a second conversation as maybe a best of grab bag 2000. Did this come out last year or 19?
Yeah, this came out in 2018. Yeah.
Are you sure of that? Okay, maybe.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not telling you you're wrong. I don't mean to be confrontational. Or
it was
anything,
really. I mean, it was right. It was. So I mean, I would need to look in and see like when theatrical release versus video on demand release and everything. But it's coded as a 2018 film
because it didn't register for our top at all. Then that surprises me.
Yeah.
Regardless, I would be interested in even another shorter conversation, solely focused on the new film, because I do think thematically there's a lot going on that's interesting and kind of worth conversing about. So,
Sure.
I think right now I will join you at a 7. I do think there's room for that to come up for if a more robust conversation were to take place.
Sure. Okay, so where that puts us on the fog meter, how about I give the 77 and you give the newer one, if that's okay. So the 77 Dario Argento film, we give on the fog meter a 3 out of 10. Man, they're gonna kill us for that. We give it a 3 out of 10. What do we give the 2018/2019 maybe the remake? What do we give to that?
Well, it looks like, Reed, in the oh my God, I can't even set this up. Well, Reed, for the 2018/19/ whenever it came out, that's the befuddlement that the Coven puts on you. You're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
The camera is all shaky and bloody and everybody's exploding. I don't know when this came out. We are going to give an 8.25. We love our quarter points here, so we are going to award 8 1/4. Which feels new to me, but hey, it's whatever.
You've been my friend a long time. This should not be new to you.
No, not you doing something, like that. I just mean like the fact that we've instituted it feels new. But regardless, it doesn't matter.
Sure.
I am she, and here we go.
So would you recommend the 77? Would you recommend the newer one? I think it's pretty clear to the listeners.
I think. It sounds like I'm hating on the 77. That's not, especially in isolation. I don't remember all the ins and outs of the conversation that we lost, but I do think it's a worthy watch, for its place in the canon. I do think even stylistically it rises, it lifts the tide, as it were. I find the 18 one, or whatever time frame it is, eminently fascinating and really strongly crafted in such a way that it there's much more fuel for actual engagement.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like if you are, if the 77 one is the definitive giallo film, and if you're a horror fan at all, I think you should seek that out. If you're only a casual horror fan, I don't know that there's going to be much in the 77 Suspiria version for you to latch on to. But the 2000, the remake, the whenever it is remake, I would, with the asterisk that it is graphic, mature content, particularly like violence and sexuality and everything not sexuality, nudity specifically, if you are palatable towards that, then it is an easy recommend, because if you can handle mature content, it is so compelling and really fascinating. That is our little bonus conversation outside of our normal
Not
format.
so little, but
Not so little.
That's all right. It was good. It was fun.
But yeah, so listeners, stay tuned next week, or in the coming week, as we had mentioned on our last episode for the next installment of Speaking in Tongues. And Nathan, thanks so much for sticking in there and doing this with me again. I really appreciate it.
Sure thing, man. See you guys next time.
Bye.
The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And you can continue the conversation in a variety of ways. You can follow us on Twitter @TheFearOfGod. You can like and follow us on Facebook or join the Facebook Fear of God discussion group. You can follow us on Instagram @FearOfGodPodcast. Go to morethanonelesson.com to leave a comment on this post or any of the other official episode posts. Email us at fearofgodpodcast@gmail.com. Our theme music was composed by Lee Wright and Reed Lackey. Our podcast art was crafted by Jacob Hunt of jacobhuntcomics.com. Merchandise for the show can be found at tpublic.com. Just search The Fear of God Podcast, all one word. And last but not least, if you listen to us through iTunes, we would greatly appreciate a rating or a review. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.